Hi, and welcome to another episode on Strathclyde Stories. This is episode number 4. Today, we're going to move a little out of campus and talk about historic and vibrant city of Glasgow. And who better than Nithi Sevaguru themselves going to come to our rescue and help us out about knowing everything about Glasgow. Hi, Nithi. Welcome to the episode number 4.
Pleasure indeed. Nice to be back again, Cherag.
So today I'm gonna, ask you some interesting things about Glasgow, right? You said that in one of the episodes you fell in love with the city. You totally like the people in the city, and you're saying like if you step in, step out of the campus, it's nothing like you find students all over. It's like you can find a bank manager or CEO or somebody who's running the department store and things like that, right? So let me ask you this. What are some fun things to do in the city of Glasgow?
Right, interesting. Well, because the university is located right in the heart of the city, one of the nicest thing is that whatever that you do, whether it's kind of visiting a museum or going into some sort of art galleries or whatever that you feel like, right? I mean, they're all quite historical. You can even take the Glasgow, the tourist bus and go around seeing as well. So the nice thing is you're right in the city, and maybe after your morning lectures, you've got nothing for the afternoon. You might want to do that. Or you probably have got 2 or 3 hours in between, and you might want to just do this kind of touring. Yes, of course. In that sense, there's a lot to do, and it's very, very lively. It's not just a question of having food at the campus canteens. You can walk down the road and have a nice meal. You could, see the city and see the people. And as I mentioned to you the last time, the nice thing is that you don't really see students all the time. And in fact, it's very hard to know who's a student and who isn't a student when you're in the heart of the city. So, if they're wearing a badge, then, okay, that's a university student. That's probably how you kind of recognize that. But I think there's a lot to do when you look at it from a city life. And it's not so much to do in terms of whether you could do travel. Of course you can, but during your weekday when you are having lectures, it's probably not the right time for you to do kind of touring out of the city. But there's a lot to do within the city itself if you've got a couple of hours to spare between lectures.
Great. So you can kind of spend your quality time according to your, place of interest or, let's say the things you are interested in. Like one of the things you said, the art, and that could be other places, historic places and things like that, right? In between lectures, that is interesting. And also off your campus time, right? So you can do that both. All right. How about the daily routine for a student? How that would look like?
Interesting. I'm glad you asked that. But I think one of the things that I noticed as a student right in the first 2 or 3 weeks is that I got to have a timetable for myself. There's- because there's so much to do. There's so
Okay.
much you want to do. You want to socialize. You want to see the place. You want to see Scotland. You've got so much in your mind, and you've got academics, you've got group discussions, you've got lectures. And I realized the best thing to handle this whole thing was by actually having a handbook of my activities for the week, because then I could allocate my time and then say, okay, great, I am taking Saturday completely off, for example, or I'm taking a Sunday completely off. And therefore, there's multiple things in which that you really need to do. To answer your question, I think the first thing is you've got to have a timetable. And then when you've got that, you can fill in the blanks, because you know all the pockets of time in which that you have an empty time. And then see if you have got people of similar interests that you could actually do certain activities. For example, it could be societies that you want to meet up, or maybe it's a sporting activity. Even for that matter, going to the gym, I'm pretty sure that it's always going to be kind of timed, because not all the time, perhaps you might be able to go at the same time. And that's because you have to be sensitive to your colleagues' timings for group discussions, and so on and so forth. So I think a typical day for everyone is probably not going to be the same, right? It's going to be probably a unique one for yourself. You need to put that timetable for yourself and say, well, this is how I'm going to play around with, right? And once you've done that, I think then you can fill in the blanks. Okay, I've got, a gym here. I've got society meets on, something here, some cultural activity here, or a movie here, or whatever. Then you kind of slot in. So I think it's going to be a busy schedule living in the city. So I think that's the way I would put it.
I get it. So if you do this in a very planned way, I mean, whatever digitally or have a daily organizer putting it in things in order, then you can manage it well. This is what I can understand. It's as good as like how your professional life is gonna be. So you got to manage it that way.
Absolutely.
Now, let me ask you a very valid and important, question coming to managing the expenses. So we are talking about Glasgow. And there's always a word London showing up in the people's lingo when they say, I'm going to UK, right? How affordable is Glasgow when compared to London?
Well, I think Glasgow, I would say, in terms of the lifestyle, the expenses, and accommodation, and food, and all that put together, I think one can significantly save between 20 and 30%. And the issue with London is that very often you're not staying very close to where your university campus is. You are likely to be staying further away simply because you want to save on your accommodation. And that also means that your travel cost also adds up. So there are multiple things in which the cost gets added up in order to have a cost of living, basically increased up, which is not particularly the case when you see in places like in Scotland and Glasgow in particular. There are many places that you can still stay out of the city, and they are significantly cheaper in accommodation, and it's probably a one bus ride away to reach the city center. So I think, yes, there's significant savings. And that also means you could spend more time on your academics and less time on your part-time job, because you realize that in order to meet your living expenses, you have to work part-time. And that simply means that that's more hours there simply to meet more expenses. I mean, in a way, that just doesn't make any sense. So I would say the best thing would be is to try and save on your part-time hours so that you can spend more time on academics, and try to improvise in terms of your scores, and perhaps get hold of a 2-1, because I think it's very important, because employers are always looking at a second class upper when they are looking into graduates, because when they see people have finished in their 50s, they will say, well, perhaps we've got a better candidate who's in the sixth, right? Because that's very, very important, I think, for a student to think about. So I'm sorry, I think I answered you more than what the question was expected. But what I'm really trying to say is, yes, the cost part of it is cheaper, and it also makes more sense for you to live in a place like Glasgow, where you can have more time to do other things.
All right. So it's food, accommodation, and other associated expenses which are relatively less when you compare to London or Greater London. In Glasgow is what I can think of. And pertaining to that, if you're gonna spend, it's gonna be travel costs. It's gonna be let's say stretching yourself to manage that lifestyle living in the London, and you're not really gonna live in London. It's just you wanna live in the periphery of the city to again catch up a train and come to Glasgow, or attend the university and go back. So it's not going to be really fun. Maybe an occasional visit would do, because you just want to experience London. You can hop a train and get there, and this is what I can understand.
Yes, of course. If anybody is actually wanting to make a visit to London and stay overnight and, come back, of course they could do that. It's, probably do a journey of about 5 hours or so, and, in a good speed the train travels in, and you can always do an overnight, go with your friends, see this place for a day or two, and then come back. I mean, that makes complete sense. But, in terms of uh, the expenses, I think there's a huge savings.
So that's the right thing to do. I can understand. Now about Glasgow, since Scotland happens to be the place where there are a lot of castles and all those historic landmarks. Could you talk about a little bit about the top attractions in Glasgow?
Yes, well, I would say a little outside of Glasgow comes all the wonderful places, right? Because Glasgow being a commercial city, the kind of attractions that you see when you go just outside of Glasgow is just quite a lot. There's a number of things. There's Stirling Castle. There's also, when you drive along in terms of going into the outskirts, you experience, Loch Ness Monster, people would have heard of. And yes, of course, the rivers are there. It's just wonderful. I mean, I think that the real experience of Scotland is actually going out of the Glasgow city and seeing the countryside. It's really beautiful. And I think the drives are very wonderful. There's always a lake on one side. It's either on the left or it's on the right. You really have lovely experiences, So I think a weekend away, even doing day trips, I think it's very cost effective for a student. You don't have to do anything about overnight. The number of day trips that one can do, one can choose to hire a car and four of you can go together. Yes, you're allowed to drive for the first year as a student. You can use the Indian driving license and take up a cab from Hertz or Avis or whomever. Yeah, you can have a very interesting, fun seeing places and going for day trips and coming back. So I think there are a number of places to actually see well outside of Glasgow and best to experience that because after some time, you would have done Glasgow, literally. So what have you got? You really need to go outside the city. So go to Edinburgh and visit the castles there. That could be a day trip. Go to Stirling and other places that could be. And there's other lovely places like Auburn and so on. Yes, of course. Believe me, the itinerary will be full for the year.
Okay. So you got like a lot of interest based attractions right outside, you're saying, the city. It's not within the city, and landscape and the scenic views will take you away. Right.
Of course. Of course. Of course. There's a number of very interesting experiences, what one can actually, to experience in Scotland. And that appeared in many movies as well. So I think it's good to experience that.
Yes, we all seen movies, beautiful landscape and scenic views and all that. All right, so Indian students, right? Our students go there. Things they're usually worried about, one, the weather, two, the food, three, the local culture. And again, who better than you to answer about all these three worries of our Indian students?
Yeah. Well, talking about weather, let me put it this way. There are external factors you can't do anything about, right? And what you need to do is be prepared for it psychologically because there's nothing that you can go and turn the switch off about the Scottish weather. It is going to be the way it is. So
Yes.
I think after a while, you're likely to sort of get used to it. You'll be fine. You'll have your winter clothings and you'll be okay. I think the skin kind of in a way gets used to, after 2 or 3 months. So, and then you feel rather very comfortable. I don't think that there is a need to be worried about the Scottish weather in a true sense. There's nothing to be worried about. It's a new weather. It's a new experience. Of all you know, once you're done with your studies, you're going to be moving on to other places and you're probably never going to experience that weather again. So I think it's good to enjoy. When it comes to, I think, food, it's something where I think Indian students now have got plenty of options in terms of food. There's a lot of there's many students who actually do self-catering. So they cook on their own. And I think as a student, I'd always advise, please learn how to make a few dishes before you leave India as a student. Don't be dependent purely on, on food cooked by others because, mom is not going to be there with you. And therefore it's good to sort of learn a few dishes and you try it yourself. Well, you're the only one who's going to eat it. So you might not get it the first or the second time, but third time onwards, you are fairly very happy with your cooked food. So I think it's very important to have the ability to actually cook. So food is plenty. I don't think that's a problem. Self-catered is going to make it more cheaper, right? Rather than going outside to eat. And when it comes to culture, and I think that's the last question that you put forward. It's a beautiful experience to see the Scottish people and interact with them. In fact, I found them one of the most friendliest that I've come across anywhere in the world that I've actually traveled. Strangers can say good morning to you. And when you are in a bus stop, for example, you're likely to see people smile at you and say, hi there, good morning. And this is wonderful. And I think that's not what you're going to see in London. Nobody's ever going to look at a stranger in London and say good morning. Forget it. That's a cosmopolitan place. Everybody's busy. Everybody's running around. And you see this sort of a difference. And I think culturally, it's very important that Indian students are not sticking to the Indian society alone. They have to experience other societies, perhaps mix with African society, the other European societies that might exist. And I think it's very good. And I think in myself as a student, I gained a lot of, lovely friends across the globe, and many of them come from the African community because I was a very active member of the African Society. And to me, that was really a wonderful experience. So I think it's very important to learn this. I've always been telling people that the fees that you pay, part of it is actually for culture as well. Don't look at it as you're paying it only for your academic learning. You're actually paying it for culture, your the things that you can never learn when you get into a work life, right? Because that's going to be, history at that point in time. So I think all of the threes are not worries, or all of the threes are adventures, whether food as well as culture. And I think it needs to be seen from a very different perspective. It's that I'm going to go there, I'm going to study, and I'm going to enjoy, I'm going to meet new people. I mean, that's the approach in which one needs to have.
Great. So, how was your own personal experience dealing with, weather, food, and the culture?
Oh, yes. The weather was, of course, a shock to me because, coming from South India, and you know what our weather is like in this part of the region. And sure enough, that's a rude shock. But, you kind of get used to it. You'll be okay. Food, as I said, I was really prepared to have a couple of dishes learned before I left. So I was not fully handicapped. It's just that I was probably cooking a bit of some rubbish in the early days, and then I realized I was improving myself, and then I started receiving guests because they liked the food that I cooked. So that was very interesting. Not the one that my mom would have liked to eat, but certainly they enjoyed it. But so that was sort of an experience for me. So, and I'm generally an extrovert kind of a person. So I go forward, I say hello to people. And I think that in a sense helped me to also culturally get together with people. So the more closed you are with your own people, the less you're going to experience about other cultures, right? And I think that's very important. You need to go out on a lunch or, a movie or whatever with the Scottish. You need to go out with somebody who is probably an African. You probably need to experience all of this. That's when you start talking about cultures, isn't it? And when you're just with your own people, you know what to expect.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
mean,
that's boring.
correct.
That's the way I would
Yeah,
look at it.
cultural exchange is what you're referring to. So you learn about their culture, they get to learn about your culture and value system and all that. So it's a cultural exchange, which is very important.
Absolutely. And I think the more uncomfortable that you feel about going out with a stranger, probably not quite a stranger because you're likely to have known them at the university, but you realize that, oh, I'm not so sure if I would culturally fit in If you feel uncomfortable, go for it. I would say just go for it, because there's a lot of listening that you would do. There's a lot of things that you would observe, and you would actually learn a lot more. You're not the ones who's doing the talking all the time, because you tend to listen. And that's actually wonderful.
I get it. So what I can understand is that your experience has been great, rather than great, and I would say incredible, right? So you had a great, incredible, awesome experience in Glasgow, and I would say you just mastered the rather than calling them as challenges, and took on this, perception these students have usually before going, that okay, how I'm gonna do well in this weather, how I'm gonna survive through the food journey, and then the culture thing, how we're gonna mix with the people who are there, right? So multinationality and global scenario, and that kind of sets the stage for you for the future, is what I can understand by experiencing all this.
Indeed. Indeed.
All right. Great, great again. So it's been wonderful to learn about Glasgow and all that insider details as a student who have experienced themselves this whole journey, right? A big thank you, Nidhi, for sharing all your experiences. I will catch up with you in the next one where we talk about the opportunities and careers that can stem out from the Strathclyde University. Thank you again.
Absolutely. Pleasure indeed. Thank you for having me. And I look forward to the next conversation too.
Sure.